Welcome to all of us for being
Everybody has to mute.
together. Can you hear me now? I suppose you
Yes.
can. Very good.
Yes.
Shake your head. Yes. All right.
Can I make a
Yes.
So
Yes.
it's
question?
important for you to have, although I'm going to have the text of Jonah with a translation, it is much easier if you have the mahzor in front of you. And if you are with the mahzor, go to page 367, where the text is to be found in the mahzor. I'm gonna, as I said before, we're gonna have the text in front of us. So those of you who know me and those who don't know me should know that in the early days of my life, I wished I had the heart, the imagination, the patience, the energy to become a rabbi and to be a theologian, but I didn't. So instead, I became an Assyriologist studying the ancient world of Mesopotamia and a biblical scholar. Now, the difference between a biblical scholar and a decent theologian who knows what he's talking about is that the biblical scholar takes the text and try to set it in the time when it's supposed to have been floating around originally. Perhaps we don't know exactly when texts are written in the Bible, but nonetheless, if we say to ourselves, it's got to be BC, it's okay. Whereas if you are a theologian, you're talking about how a text, especially a biblical text, means for you today. I don't do that well, so I'm going to try to give you an impression of how you work with a text and try to make it say a bit more than the flat reading of it as we do today, because we will have connection with language of the past, we'll have connection with cultures of the past, and also with the modes by which they told each other narratives, they told each other stories. Now, for some of you who were with me during Shavuot when I gave a talk on the book of Ruth, you will know that you will instantly realize there's something quite different between the book of Ruth and the book of Jonah. The book of Ruth, every chapter would end on a wonderful little connective between the end of that chapter and the beginning of the next chapter, such that when you see the plot, you can see it unraveling one chapter after the other until you come to the gorgeous ending of that. With Jonah, it's very difficult to have such a notion, such a trajectory. First of all, if you think of Aristotelian method of how you deal with a drama, with a story, he talked about three central principles. You have to have unity of space. You have to have unity of time, and not rosemary and time, T-I-M-E. And you have to have unity of action. If you look at the book of Jonah, you have 4 chapters, not one of them in the same space as the other. Well, maybe the last 2 are a bit more toward each other, but one of them is in the middle of the Mediterranean. The other one is a deep down in the Mediterranean within the belly of a fish. The third one is in Nineveh, and the fourth one outside of Nineveh. How about time? In fact, there is only one passage that speaks about time, 2 passages. One of them is that he is 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of a fish, as we all know. I'm not shocking you by revealing more because you've probably heard the story many times before. And the other one is when he makes a declaration. Now, this declaration itself is very amazing because when you think about it, if you look at the prophets of Israel, they never stop talking, chapters on chapters and chapters and chapters. This particular prophet has 3 words to say, or 5 words to say. That's it. So you say, you have this fantastic mission and all you say are 5 words. It's very strange. The other thing about it is that nowhere do we have any information in that text itself that he is a prophet. So the whole story becomes, why is he in the book of prophets? In fact, as we shall see, that book really doesn't deserve to be among the smaller prophets. It would be much better in other sections, as we shall talk in a minute, of the Bible. All right. So one important thing is when you're dealing with any biblical narrative is you have to keep your eyes on how the first verses develop, because they will be important. They will give you information on where the text hopes to go, where the story hopes to go, and it gives you some notion of what it is that you should expect to give you a sense of an ending, a satisfactory ending. We will discover that in the book of Jonah, we're going to have a very hard time with this type of material. So the other thing about the book of Jonah that is very strange is that it really gives you a lot of names of places, Tarshish, Nineveh, Jaffa, and all these places. Hardly gives you any name at all. The only name it gives you is the name of Jonah and the name of his father, as we shall see. The other thing also is that when you are in Nineveh and we have the king of the area, we don't even have his name. It would have been nice if we had his name. We would have been able to say, when is this happening? So all these things introduces you to a world that is very, very strange. The only information we have about a Jonah outside of this book of Jonah comes to us from the book of Kings. And I want to read to you the passage because it will give you a sense of where that book of Jonah is going to take us. Okay? Stay with me. I'm reading it. This is from the second book of Kings, chapter 14, verses 23 and so forth. In the 15th year of Amaziah, son of Joash, king of Judah, Jeroboam, son of Joash, king of Israel, began to reign in Samaria, and he reigned 41 years. He was sinful in the sight of God, departing not at all from the sins of the other Jeroboam, Jeroboam the son of Nebat, who had made Israel sin. Yet this Jeroboam, it was he who restored Israel's frontier from Hamath's vicinity as far as the Dead Sea. This according to the word of the Lord, Israel's God, who spoke through his servant Jonah, the son of Amittai, the prophet from Gath Hefer. For the Lord observed how very bitter was Israel's plight, with absolutely no ruler, no one to help rescue Israel. The Lord did not seek to wipe out the name of Israel from beneath heaven. Rather, he rescued them through Jeroboam, son of Joash. So in that other story about Jonah, we have also this very unusual situation that he is sent to a very, very sinful person who deserved to be beaten the heck out of. And instead of telling him, hey, you're going to drop dead unless you behave, he tells him wonderful things. You're going to expand. You're going to make great, Papa. And in fact, historically speaking, what we do know about the Jeroboam II in this case, is he probably was among the most successful king of Israel. And he reigned 41 years. Usually these guys drop dead in 2 seconds when they're sinful like that. So everything about the other stories about Jonah tells you to expect something that goes against the grain, the normal grain. So far, so good? Good. Now we can go to our story. All right. Now, do you have your mahzor in front of you? Maybe we can put up the text now. Rachel? Okay, thank you. This is from Sepharia, an online, absolutely wonderful tool that gives you access to zillions and zillions and zillions of Judaica material, Tanakh, Midrash, any Zohar, the Rabbanim, the medieval, all Mefarshim, and all these things, you can have them. Okay, so now it's important to know that when you have a story, you should pay attention, as I said before, to the beginning. So let us go together. I'm going to spend a bit more time at these beginnings so that you can see where we are going to go. Vayhi devar Adonai el Yonah ben Amitai lemor. Okay, wonderful. The word of the Lord came to Jonah, son of Amittai. Now here is the trick. When you look at how books of the Bible begin, generally the way they begin is you have Vayhi, followed by a time. Vayhi bimei Ahashverosh hu Ahashverosh. It was in the time of Ahashverosh, king, he was all of these things would begin with this business of giving you what it was and what time it was before they go into the text itself. However, when you look at the book of prophets, almost always they begin like this. Devar Adonai haya el sam el Yehezkel or el Yeshayahu. They begin with Devar Adonai was. The word of the Lord was to such and such a prophet. So what you have here is a composite, Vayhi Devar Adonai. What is absolutely wonderful is you find this type of beginning for tales, not at the beginning of books, but in the middle of books. Let us say you're telling stories about Elijah the prophet. He is within the story of Israel at a time when there was a king named Ahab, and he had this sinful wife played by Paulette Goddard in the movie, Jezebel. Okay? So, when you find Vayhi Devar Adonai El Eliyahu, it's because you already know something about Elijah, and you're going to have more about Elijah. So this way of beginning, this composite way, the word of the Lord came to Jonah, son of Amittai, tells you that if you are a person living in ancient time, that this is something extracted from a whole series of lores about this fellow. It is not like God is speaking to Jeremiah, tell them this, tell them that. No. And it is not like it was in the time of Ahashverosh. No, this is this composite that you find only in medias res. Is that clear? I hope it is. All right. I don't have a way of knowing, but I guess it is. All right. So this story is picked up from many stories. And if you see it that way, then you'll know that the ending is not necessarily the ending, because there probably are other stories attached to this fellow. Okay? Fine. Now, what is this? Kum lech el Nineveh ha'ir ha'gedola ukra aleha ki alata ra'atam lefanai. Go at once to Nineveh, that great city, and proclaim judgment. Our translations say, well, it says the same thing, proclaim judgment upon it. Now, look at this vocabulary. It's important to notice. The word for proclaim judgment is kera aleha with ayin. If you are Ashkenaz, you won't even know. You would say kera aleha. You're very, 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 nice about these things. But if you are a Semite in ancient time, you would say aleha. Now, kara al means to tell someone that you are finished, you are dead. Later on, we're going to find the same one, but we're going to see it with kara el, not ayin, but aleph. Kara el with aleph does not mean telling them you're going to drop dead. You are going to tell them, I have a message for you. I have a warning for you. I am warning you. So this way of beginning and the way we're going to see it later are opposite. I am Jonah, all right? I hear God tells me, go against this terrible place, this Nineveh city, zillions of miles away, and what you're going to tell them is, you're going to drop dead. Why? Because your evil is so clear-cut before me. See? Now, let's continue. Vayakum Noah livroah, Jonah livroah, Tarshisha. And Jonah began to go to Tarshish, running away from God. Now, he went down to Joppa and found a ship. The text says, Vayimsa onia ba'a Tarshish. It doesn't mean it's going to Tarshish. It just came from Tarshish. The translation is fudging here. He found a ship coming from Tarshish. Now, I want to say 2 seconds. Tarshish is more or less the frontier of imagination for the Hebrews. If their world is small, Tarshish will be 2 miles away. If the world is larger, Tarshish will be 2 miles beyond that. So Tarshish is not quite an El Dorado or a Shangri-La, something that didn't exist. It existed, but it was always far away. It's like Timbuktu for the 19th century or 20th century. So, and the other texts that tell us, if rabbinic texts and so forth, and also biblical texts, that going to Tarshish was not just jumping into a ship, going there, coming back in 24 hours. It took up to 3 years to have an expedition go to Tarshish and back. When a ship would go about 10 knots a day or something at most, all right? So what you have here is that he goes to Jaffa. Jaffa was never part of ancient Israel or ancient Judah ever. It was always foreign territory. So this guy, God tells him, go to Nineveh, foreign territory. He says, okay, God, I'm going to go to a foreign territory, but not the one you expect. He goes the opposite direction. He goes to Jaffa, and he finds a ship that has just come from Tarshish. And you would say to yourself, oh my God, these guys are going to have to take time to relax and so forth. No, he paid its fare. Did he rent the whole boat? Doesn't matter. He paid its fare, he went into it, and he wanted to go with Tarshish with them. Let's get the heck out of here. You see how the story is? So it is total luck on his part that he was able to find the right ship, going at the right place, and poofa, he's escaping. He didn't have to wait. He didn't have to worry about whether God is going to get him in Jaffa. All right, we continue. So let me see, maybe I should do it. Okay, go down. All right, so he is on the ship. No, a bit earlier. Oh, yeah. All right, it doesn't really matter. The point about it is that he takes this ship and he goes away on that ship on the Mediterranean. Of course, anyone who expects how much of good luck he's going to have, it's going to turn around very quickly. He's just out on the ship for a few minutes, and poof, we have a huge storm. And there was the whole sea is in an uproar. And the text here is absolutely wonderful. You hear the onomatopoeia. The ship was in danger of breaking up. It wasn't in danger of breaking. It thought itself to be breaking up. So you see how the language becomes very evocative of the pain that everyone is having. All right. So here is Jonah. He is in the ship. The ship goes out. Suddenly we have a storm. Usually, if you are on the Mediterranean, everyone knows you don't go into the Mediterranean between, let us say, Sukkot and after Pesach, because you're going to have storms, absolutely horrible storms that are going to get you. So the point about it is that they probably sailed at the right time, and they were shocked to have this terrible storm. The first thing they do is they throw away everything, fine. And meanwhile, the text tells us, Jonah goes down, and the text says he lay down and fell asleep. Now, please, this is not he went to sleep. He didn't go there to sleep. In fact, the Greek translation says he went down and started snoring. Maybe they found it funny. But in fact, Radam is almost being in a coma, is being in a very deep sleep. And this is how, in some cases, prophets start getting trances in order to get the word of God. So as soon as the storm came in, Jonah knew that the jig was up. He knew what is happening. He goes down and he says, God, I'm ready to listen. So he didn't go to sleep, but he went there to prepare himself for this trance-like situation when he hears God. And everyone goes banana. The captain goes over. How can you be sleeping? Da, 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 da. And he tells them, get up. So at this, now, oh yeah, this is going to be a problem, I think, maybe. Okay, let's go down a bit. We have here the ship captain. Out of the blue, he started telling him, get up, start telling us. But what happened at that point is that they absolutely knew that something is wrong. And usually it means one god or another is upset with them. Why? Because this is not the time of the year when you have horrible things like that. So they cast lots. Now, this usually is a very, very long process, because to cast lots means first you have to say, which God is it? Is it this God? Is it this goddess? Is it this God, this God? And then if the lot comes in on this God, terrific. Then you say, is it because one of us? Is it because da, 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 da? So it takes a long time to find out. We don't spend any time on this. Bingo, the lot falls on Jonah, okay? And at that point, they say, please, what's going on? And he tells them, I am Hebrew. I worship the God of heaven and of the sea, da, 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 da. Now, normally, people who are pagan will say, okay, what's wrong? We have other gods. Why don't we pray to them? No, the whole story now doesn't worry so much about telling you reality. Instantly, they say to him, yes, we understand what is happening. And when the people realize that this is coming from this God, that's God of heaven, they said, what should we do? And he tells them, dump me into the sea. Now, you would say to yourself, okay, so they take him and dump him. But they said, but instead what happens is, please continue the text. He says, take me, throw me into the sea. Maybe I should take it. Maybe I should. Yeah. Okay, so at that point, they didn't throw him into the sea. Instead, the men rowed hard to regain the shore. Now, if you know anything about ancient navigation, maybe even modern navigation, I'm not a sailor, but I read about it. They say the worst thing in the world when you are in a storm is for you to try to go back to where you are. Because when you try to do that, you are going to crack up against reefs, against outcropping of rocks. You're going to go far apart. The last thing in the world is you do that. Instead, you just stay there, drop your sail, and hope for the best. But they didn't, because they lost their cunning. They didn't know anymore what to do. They realized it. They start praying to that God, and they say, please, we realize that we're going to throw this man, he's going to drop dead. And when he dies, it's going to be against us if we have made the bad judgment. If we had decided that, in fact, we listened to him wrongly because he didn't know what he's talking about, it will be our error, our guilt for having done it. So they take him, they throw him into the water, everything is perfect. As soon as the water, they realize instantly that it is, in fact, God. What Jonah said is true. And that in itself is very important. because it tells you how easy it is for people who are not Hebrews to realize the might of that great God and to instantly accept what they must do if a prophet comes to them and tell them. All right? So keep this in mind, because that's going to be very important when we come to the third chapter, when he goes to another group of pagans and he tells them things that are totally outrageous. So this story about the ship, aside from telling you many, many things, it tells you also that people are not necessarily given to doubt when they know for a fact that there is a God in heaven. Totally important. The other thing that's very important is that this little story is almost complete in itself, because we have them, they don't necessarily become Jewish and start sending money to the United Jewish Appeal. No, but we have them, they accepted the fact, they sacrificed to that God. So you have a nice happy ending. But when you look at this story, it is really in some ways almost allegorical, as if this little allegory was taken and put in the story of Jonah. How is it allegorical? It's allegorical about the notion of the ship of state. The ship of state goes in very ancient time. It tells you that a community of people, a nation, is like a ship. And if it has a decent helmsman, and if the helmsmen have decent advisors, they will know how to navigate, even if there are storms. But in this case here, what you have are people, because of that helmsman, listen to this prophet who tells them things that seems absurd, everything becomes well. So in some ways, this is a little allegory. I say this because in Kabbalistic lore, in the Zohar and elsewhere, the whole story of Jonah is taken to be an allegory. Not this, but the whole story, the allegory of how the soul discovers its error and goes all the way to the depth before rising up and realizing truth. This is how it is. So, okay. We now go to the next chapter. The next chapter tells you about God's command of nature. Look at the verb at the beginning. The Lord provided, vayeman. You see that? We're going to find that three times more in the story of Jonah. Whenever God takes charge and goes beyond what is expected, we have the verb vayeman. He provided, that is, he took control, he shaped. Okay, so that word is not accidental. It prepares you. What does it prepare you? It prepares you to see something amazing. We're going to see it again when we have the famous Kayon plant. We're going to see it again when we have a wind coming out of the blue. See, God sends these things control. So this story becomes now slightly different in terms of its texture. Vayoman Adonai Dag Gadol. A big fish. What kind of fish is it? I don't know. No one cares. In Hebrew, there are no vocabulary for specific, in the Hebrew Bible anyway, no vocabulary for a specific fish. You either had a fish or not fish. That's it. So we don't know what it is. But they say it is big. How big? They don't say. In the Greek translation, they make him a ketus. Ketus is something equivalent to our whale. So you have him sitting there. But in my mind, the story would have been much better. Yes?
Is manna the same word?
No. You mean the manna that comes from heaven? No.
Okay.
But let's continue. Okay, I'm sorry. Because I was going to lose my thought. The thing about it would have been much better if he was swallowed by a guppy, because the miracle would have been even greater. But that is not the issue. The issue is to isolate Jonah and give him a chance to continue showing his belief in the great God. All right? Because he already has accepted his fate. He already knew that God wants him to do something. but he had to come to his own realization and vocalize it in such a way that God not only believes him, because God would know, of course, what is happening, but because he had to make himself believe of what is happening. The prayers that Jonah has from the belly of the fish is an absolutely beautiful little uh, poem in some ways. It begins with the notion about, well, do you want to scroll up a bit? Maybe it doesn't matter. I won't spend too much time on it. But it begins with the notion that he cried out to God, and we build slowly but surely to that moment when he begs God to allow him to see the holiness of the God and to be near God, and then everything becomes better for him until the end. But you should know that there's not one line in this poem that is not found elsewhere in the Psalms, in the prophets, and what have you. In fact, some of the best biblical poetry is made up as what they call in Latin a canto, which is chaining together vocabulary and phrases and ideas and sentiments that are found elsewhere. So there is not one line here that you are not going to find somewhere else. But the point of it, the genius of it, is that whoever edited that story, the many stories about Jonah, managed to make it such that it seems a bit more persuasive about the fate of this particular fellow named Jonah. Something similar occurs in the story of Hannah in the book of Samuel, where we have the story about how Hannah doesn't have a child, you know the story, I don't want to go into it. But the point about it there is that as soon as God sends her the son that she wants, Samuel, she breaks into this gorgeous poem. But there, that gorgeous poem has nothing to do with Samuel. It has to do with kings and rulers and how, when by obeying God, they do the right thing. So in a way, it doesn't fit as well as the story here fits. Everything fits, but some fits better than others. All right, now let me jump to, at the end, he throws him, God forces tells the fish to, orders the fish to throw Jonah up, and he's up on, all right. Now, of course, we don't even ask ourselves, where did the fish throw him? This is totally immaterial, because in any case, you know, he's going to cross a lot of land to go to Nineveh. Doesn't matter. Next thing we know, we are in chapter 3. Let us go to chapter 3, where we have very important vocabulary, all right? Okay. So far, so good? I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt questions. It's okay to ask, but I think time is running short, and I want to cover the most important part, which is chapter 4. All right. So here we go. And God picked up the order again the second time, and he says, Kum lech el Nineveh, the same thing as we had before. Go to Nineveh, that great city. Ukra eleha, not aleha, eleha. And go and tell it this message that I'm going to give you. All right? So you see, it's different at this stage. It's no longer telling him, go tell him, drop that. I have a message for you to go. And Jonah gets the message. He goes to Nineveh. And the text tells us, Nineveh, and Nineveh was a great city, enormously large. 3 days walk. 3 days walk just to go from one gate to another. It is enormous. It's bigger than Carborough.
A technical question.
Yes.
In the first verse,
yes.
Asher anochi dover elecha.
Yes, it's a participle.
That rarely shows up, that verb rarely shows up in Kal. What is the significance of that?
Well, you know, it just means dover when it's a participle, okay, which means it is not that I've told you or I will tell you, but I'm constantly telling you. You see? In other words, this is the message that you must carry at all time with you. Dover, okay? So it's a participle. Okay, now, look, this is important, very important. So Jonah enters the city, huge city. He only goes one day. He doesn't even wait to go to Olivet. He has a message. And what does he say? Listen, in Hebrew. Od 40 yom v'Nineveh nehpachet. 40 more days and Nineveh shall be overthrown. This is gorgeous. The basic verb. Now, 40, why 40? Because in biblical lore, 40 is a passage of when you go from one stage to another, major step to another, one stage to another. So in one important chunk of time, when it ends, Nineveh will be nehpachet. Now, the verb hafach means to turn around, hafach. In the stories of Sodom and Gomorrah, it's always hafach. It's the kal, that is the simplest way in which that verb occurs, hafach. But this one here is nehpach. Nehpach is what you call a nif'al. A nif'al is a form of the verb which takes the root and allows it to be considered in a different way than if it's just simple root. When you have a nif'al, a verb very often is passive, which means that the city itself will be overthrown. I don't say who's going to do it, but it's going to be overthrown. But the nif'al is also reflexive, which means that in 40 more days, Nineveh will not overthrown, but turn over. See? Do you understand? So when he goes in there and he comes with this message, he has a message that has double possibilities. One, in 40 more days, Nineveh will drop dead. The other one is 40 more days, Nineveh will have a chance to reform itself. You see what it is? The whole story revolves around the notion that for Jonah, he only understood one way for Nehpachet. It will be overthrown. But God knows Hebrew much better than Jonah, and he has a completely, slightly different notion of what is going to happen. It doesn't mean that God is going to change its mind. It means that anything that will happen is already predicted ahead of time. This is crucial. Do you understand, people? Good. So out of the blue, instantly people believe him. If, as I said, if you didn't have the story of the storm and the Malachim and the sailor, you may not have really believed this. They all wore clothing, they all from top to bottom. And when the word reached the king of Nineveh, now this is extremely important too, everything is important, it's horrible. The king of Nineveh, there is no way in the whole Tanakh, in all our texts, to speak about the king of Assyria. He's either the king of Ashur, but he's never the king of a specific city. And here we don't have a name. So when you see words that are very odd, idiom very odd, construction very odd, you instantly start to say to yourself, why? He could have said, Vayiga dabar el melech Ashur, to the king of Assyria, and he come up, or Babylon, whatever. But not this here. This is very, very strange. What it gives you the sense that for a biblical writer, he's giving you a hint that there is no such thing as a king of Nineveh, even though there was a Nineveh and there was a king and all that, but it's never, the vocabulary is not correct. That you should not think necessarily of this story as historical, but to think of this story as more giving you a different sort of message. It is not about this is what happened. It is about what really happened, which is more important than what historically happened. All right. So you have things like that in the other parts in the Bible. For example, when you have in Genesis 14, Abram at that time, he is fighting these various kings that came from Elam and elsewhere. And the kings that coming there, you have the king of Sodom, the king of Gomorrah, and each one of these kings, Berah, Bersha, have names that no woman would ever give to her son. One of them is that he is an evil. Another one, he is a disgusting. I don't know, all these horrible names. It tells you right away that you should not take these stories as much historical as uh, as truth. You know, truth is not necessarily just history. So we have that. The king of Nineveh, whatever, instantly accept, and he removes his clothing, sits on dust, and he gives a proclamation. Now, this is interesting. I don't say it's important, but it's interesting. So he says, ויזעק ויאמר בנינווה מטעם המלך וגדוליו לאמור. And he says, everyone, from human and animals, they must not eat, they must not do anything. Now, remember, we have added the animals here. This is going to be crucial as we come to the end of the story, and you'll see why in a minute. Go down a bit, Rachel. All right. So they put on their clothing, they said, and now the king of Nineveh says, let everyone turn back from his evil ways and from the injustice of which he is guilty. Who knows but that God may turn and relent? In other words, they're having hope. However, if you look at the Hebrew text and the way our ancestors put punctuation on it, it does not say, Mi yodeya yashuv v'nehama Elohim. Who knows but that God may turn? It says, Mi yodeya yashuv. See the two dots above? That tells you that's where you stop. It means he who knows will go back and realize so that God can turn around and become good to us. So it becomes a Gnostic message. Those who know, they will be the one to help us get out. Okay, so when God realized that these people are coming back with tshuva, everything is fine, at this point, God changed his mind and what have you. However, keep in mind that whatever God decided to do, whether to destroy them or to accept the fact that they have changed, all that was part of the message he gave Jonah. So it's not a matter that God just picked like that, but it is the potential of human being to turn around and accept God's decree and God's warning. That is what is the most important part of that message that is giving it to us here. Okay, so far so good. All right. Now, chapter 4. This is the most amazing chapter that we have of all the chapters. You know, being in the belly of the whale, of course, is really amazing, but it is not terribly believable. And in fact, when Josephus, the great propagator of Jewish lore to nations who were not Jews, Romans at that time, in the 1st century CE, rewrote the whole Bible in order for foreigners, for Romans, to know how the Hebrews have terrific traditions and terrific lore. When he came to this particular moment, he just skipped entirely from having put Jonah in the belly of the whale. He just claims that he fell asleep, and that was the end of that. From the moment he sleeps in the boat until he finds himself in Nineveh, it's all a dream. Because he knew no one would believe that. Now here, we have something quite different. It's not that's unbelievable, but believing it, what happened, becomes less important than understanding what is happening. So the text tells us that Jonah was very displeased. Now, keep in mind that for Jonah, he expected Nineveh to be destroyed. He never understood that it could turn around and find teshuvah. So for him, he is a bit riled, not so much because it didn't happen, but because, and he's going to tell us. So he's prayed and he says, oh God, I knew all the time, even when I was in my country, even before I fled, I knew that you're compassionate, da, 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 da. Now, when you read this, you will say to yourself, what Jonah is admitting here is that God may have sent him, but God, of course, is always more compassionate than any person would ever imagine. Even when he is telling people that they are doomed, he has found a way to give them a chance. So Jonah repeats that line and what have you. However, when you think about it, if this is true, that Jonah always understood that God will turn around and will be kind and will be merciful and what have you, if he knew that, he will understand. He will not be angry. He will not be displeased with this whole business. But what you have here, in fact, is Jonah telling God, you are forgiving to these people who have been lousy. I knew all along that if I ran away from you, you're going to forgive me too. It's not about them. It's about me. I am the person who knew that you are totally compassionate and that you will accept the fact that I ran away from you and I didn't listen. So if you think of it that way, if this is what Jonah had in mind, God had to teach him a lesson of some sort, because Jonah has not gotten there yet. He's not with him. Now, this is a beautiful little piece. Wasn't that my word? What he says to him, for you are a compassionate and gracious God, slow to anger. This vocabulary is probably the most wonderful sentiment that is found throughout the Bible. You find at least 18 different iterations of the same thing, slightly different vocabulary and what have you. It is founded from the book of Exodus, it is found in the prophet, it's found in the proverb, it's found everywhere, because that is a basic sentiment that the Hebrews had always, that deep down, God is much more merciful than we deserve, right? The other thing that's important about this is when you count the number of words in which Jonah is speaking from Anna Adonai Halose, O Lord, you say to yourself, Jack Sasson, what are you doing? This, that. Well, it's because when we come to the end of the story and God makes his speech, it's exactly 39 words. And then in between this passage of when Jonah makes his statement to God making his statement at the end, we're going to have two other sets of dialogue, each one exactly proportional. Jonah will say 3 words, God will say 3 words. Jonah will say 5 words, God will say 5 words. In other words, this chapter, unlike the others that seem to be very folkloristic and maybe based on stories, a person surviving a fish, a person being in a storm, whatever it is, this is a very highly worked out chapter. It's a very thought out chapter that has much more detailed interest in telling you now not so much about Nineveh and about fish. It is more about the internal dialogue that human beings have with their God, sometimes doubting, sometimes believing, but all the time, not always what is the word that I want to use? Not always in sync with each other. You see? So this beginning of the story is important. Continue. Please go down, Rachel. All right. And now he says, I knew you were always merciful, and because of that, my interpretation, I ran away from you, and now I challenge you. You are God, you're merciful. Kill me. I don't care. Now, in Bible, we have a number of stories in which people ask for God to kill them. Oops, what's happening? Okay, who ask God to bring the end to their lives. But this one is so selfish. What did what did what is it that God has done that makes Jonah so unhappy? Is it because he feels as if he's been misused as a prophet? Is that enough? And here, God doesn't tell him, "Oh well, tell me everything. Lie on the couch, please. Let's work." He says, "Are you that deeply grieved? As if this is not believable. Are you?" And at that point, he goes outside of the city. Now, this is also slightly important. He builds for himself a sukkah, and the story is that he goes and he has a nice shade underneath it. He's sitting down and he wants to see what God will do. He still believes that God is going to do something awful to these Ninevites because Jonah cannot accept the fact that God really has used him like that, threw him into the depths of the sea, then made him come all the way across with all these gastric juices on him, all the way just to say something that will become unimportant. All right, so continue. So he builds for himself a sukkah, and he could have just waited there. But then, Vayeman, you remember that verb? Not Vayeman, and God took control, he provided. For a kikayon tree, don't waste a second trying to find out what exactly kind of plant it is. No plant grows like that and dies like that and poof like that. This is supposed to be another one of God's miracle. All right. So he produces this kikayon who goes over the head and it protects him. And Jonah is very happy. He's happy not because he had protection, he had already a sukkah, and he could sit in its shade. But he's happy, he says, aha, I really dared God, and I made him do what I want. What did he do? He brought this wonderful plant to show me that I'm still in full favor with him. I was not abused. He is trying to show me how wonderful I am. So he gives him this kikayon, and Jonah, because of this kikayon, Jonah says to himself, I've been restored to my own pride. And at that point, up again, Rachel, Vayeman Adonai, where are we? What? Up, yes. A bit more. Where was it? We're going back to the same passage. I don't know. Can you go up a bit? Okay. And then God produces this. I have 3 minutes and I'm going to finish. And God produces the tolat, that kills the plant. And as if this is not enough, there's a huge wind that comes in another time, by Yemen again, a huge wind that completely destroys everything, takes away the sukkah, takes away everything. And now Jonah realizes that something is going not so good. At that point, when he says to himself, not to God, I am going to die. I'm going to drop dead. I'm going to die. Now, this is very important. This beginning, this plant that can go in one day and die another is really an allegory. Because if you remember, this morning in the Yiskor service, it says, oh God, what are human beings that you take account for them? What are these mortal that you care for? Human are nothing but a breath. Their days like a passing shadow. In the morning, they flourish in you, and in the evening, they shrivel and die. So this, in some ways, is allegorical about fate of human beings. You see? All right. At that point, God gives his big speech. And when he gives this big speech, this is the part that is the most impressive. Because in his speech, when God tells Jonah about why he had to have pity on Nineveh, you can see how Jonah and God never met each other, never understood each other. Why is that? Because in fact, when God tells him, you had pity on the Kikayon that died, and I shouldn't have pity over all these people, so many people, zillions of people. In fact, Jonah never gave a damn about uh, the Kikayon. He really cared only about himself being under a shade. And when God tells him, I have saved the city that has zillions of people, God didn't save them because they had zillions of people. God saved them because they asked for forgiveness. They understood that a God who is forgiving need to have reason to give you forgiveness. And they did it. So at the end of the story, when we end with it, that God speaks about all these people and the animals too, we're brought back to the 3rd chapter, in which animals are also part of the complete forgiveness that God gives to human when they show themselves totally accepting of their errors. So at the end of the chapter, we don't have a Jonah who understood what it's about. We only have us who understood what's about. And the rabbis, in fact, worried about that. And what they did is they ended up the story of Jonah, and not with this line here, but they ended up with a passage from the book of Micah. Now I lost it, this passage, when it says, who equals you as God in removing iniquity? God does not perpetuate anger endlessly. You will hurl all the trespasses into the sea, and so forth and so on. I'm making it quick to say that this little passage that is added from the book of Micah is in fact what we are to leave with. Not so much what happened with Jonah, who, in my opinion, never really understood what it's about, but it is about the fact that we and God can understand each other better, and in this way, ask for the type of forgiveness that Yom Kippur and soon the Ne'ilah will be able to give us. Thank you very much. Hatima Tova, and we continue to hear our great Rabbi Sega. I don't think there's any more time, right, Rachel?
Yeah,
Rachel?
it's time for Rabbi Seger.
What?
Beautiful, Jack. Thank you. Thank you so much.
It's 4 o'clock now.
Okay, fine.
Thank you.
Goodbye. Thank you.
Thank
Goodbye.
you.
Thank you so much,
Goodbye.
Jack.
Thank you, Jack.
Yes,
Thank
yes,
you.
yes,
Fatima
yes,
Tova.
yes, yes, yes.
Thank you so much.